Ukrainian forces have so far managed to hold on to the capital, Kyiv, defying U.S. intelligence assessments, despite the increasing intensity of the Russian onslaught. But U.S. officials are now warning that Russia could soon increase the intensity of their attack.
As of today, Russian forces are invading Ukraine. The U.S. seems to play a part in the reasoning for this invasion, and these sequence of events could possibly be the precursor of what might eventually end up World War III. Let's break down this situation. I'd like to start off by mentioning, though originally on opposing sides of the battle, eventually during World War II, the Soviet Union, Western Europe, and the U.S. fought together to defeat Hitler and the Nazis. But after the war was over, tensions flared between the last and powerful nations due to opposing each other's system of government. This tension between the U.S. and Russia and their respective allies became known as the Cold War. Both sides talked a lot of shit, large propaganda campaigns defaming each other's societies, some land acquisitions, but there wasn't any military confrontation.
Under the protection of our freedoms, American labor, management, and capital, the greatest production team in the history of mankind, have made the United States the industrial master of the world. Capital must continue to provide industry with the funds to create new tools and plants. Labor and management must continue to increase the production of better goods at lower prices, so that more people will be able to buy the things that make life easier and happier for all of us. Then Joe will continue to be the king of the workers of the world.
You said it, brother.
Our TV can always be trusted. I would never trust American TV, all those channels and different programs.
In recent years, the Soviet media has said much about the American way of life, and its portrait of America is a dark one. It is designed to convince the Soviet people that our social system is anything but desirable. It emphasizes violence, drug abuse, unemployment, and overall exploitation of the American people by the government. Last summer, Pravda published a lengthy article entitled Incurable Disease, which dealt with U.S. unemployment and bank failures. About the same time, Moscow was saying that there are 40 million Americans who are literally starving, while a select group of capitalists continues to get richer. America is the quintessence of an unjust capitalist system that keeps millions of families living below the official poverty line. The unemployed are described as having been deprived of the right to work, while Moscow television shows film of locked factory gates and people being evicted from their homes. The message in all this is that the capitalist system in America is unfair and is, in fact, a failure at providing for basic human needs or maintaining continued national growth. The U.S. economy, as described by the Soviet media, is being driven by raging militarism. Defense spending is reported to be the cause of unemployment in civilian industries, and also the cause of the huge federal deficit.
The beef was, and is, capitalism versus communism. Pretty much elected leaders versus settled dictatorship. Capitalism promotes private property and independent wealth within society, as for communism promotes focusing on the equality of citizens more over than individual wealth. Capitalism is more selfish, communism is more community-based. After the end of World War II, between July and August 1945, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union had to sit down to discuss how to disperse ownership of Germany's land. This was known as the Potsdam Conference. Germany was divided into 4 occupied zones: Great Britain in the northwest, France in the southwest, the United States in the south, and the Soviet Union in the east. 3 years later, in 1948, the Brussels Treaty was signed by Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, which was an agreement to collaborate economically, socially, and culturally and create a collective self-defense alliance in Western Europe.
Unopposed, the men of the Kremlin would eventually destroy Europe. The nations of the West at last began to talk of collective security. In March 1948, a treaty providing for collaboration in economic, social, and cultural matters, and for mutual assistance in the event of aggression, was signed at Brussels. It brought together Great Britain, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands.
But understanding that the Western European collective military still weren't equipped to handle or combat the Soviet Union, they sought to expand their military even more. And in April 1949 in Washington, D.C., the North Atlantic Treaty was signed by the U.S., Canada, and various Western European powers, thus creating NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Article 5 of the treaty states that an attack on one of the nations would mean an attack on all of the nations. So Article 5 pretty much explains that if the Soviet Union were to attack any of the NATO members, that they'll all fight together to fend them off. Now understand that both the Brussels Treaty and NATO were founded specifically due to the threat of the Soviet Union. And I'm pretty sure this is what Putin is referring to when he says that he's acting in defense. Now, I find it interesting that both sides proclaim to be acting in defense, which is the reason for all the bluffing for all this time. Not to say that these nations haven't participated in any military expeditions, but ever since World War II, there hasn't been any upfront battles between the world powers. It's usually the less powerful nations that fall victim to the discrepancies these world powers have. In May of 1949, Great Britain, France, and the U.S. took their respective territories in Germany and merged into the Federal Republic of Germany, and the Soviet Union followed suit and created the German Democratic Republic for their respective territories that same year. In 1955, the Federal Republic of Germany, or Western Germany, joined NATO.
The entry of the German Federal Republic into NATO is indeed a historic event. As my predecessor, Sir Anthony Eden, so often emphasized, NATO is an intimate but not an exclusive organization. And I think that many of us would have wished him to be here today to witness personally the culmination of a policy to which he made so great a contribution. That is the policy of bringing the Federal Republic into the free association of sovereign states.
Now we welcome to our company the Federal Republic of Germany, represented here by its great statesman, Dr. Adenauer. We rejoice that the defense of freedom is thus enlarged and strengthened.
And as a response to this transpiring, that same year the Warsaw Pact was formed, which was an alliance consisting of the Soviet Union, Albania, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and the German Democratic Republic, or Eastern Germany, sworn to protect each other in case of an attack. The Cold War began in 1946 and lasted until 1991 with the lowering of the Soviet flag and the disassembling of the Warsaw Pact. As a result, Ukraine also gained its independence, but Russia resurrected another military pact in 1992, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, consisting of Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, later joined by Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Georgia in 1993. In 1994, the respective world powers had a meeting to discuss Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. This would create what would be known as the Budapest Memorandum. Okay, so now Ukraine has a bunch of nuclear weapons that Russia had stationed there back in the Soviet Union Warsaw Pact days. And they don't really want them anymore because they can't afford to maintain them. So the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia had met to discuss the disarmament of Ukraine's nuclear weapons. In order to officially establish and recognize Ukraine's independence, Ukraine had to give up all their nuclear weapons and declare themselves a non-nuclear weapon state. The Russian nukes went back to Russia, and Ukraine was supposed to destroy all the nuclear weapons that they had created. In exchange for these protocols, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia had pledged to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and guarantee that their borders would be respected and that they would never be attacked by these world powers. So, how did we get here? If Russia pledged to protect the sovereignty of the Ukraine and they said that they would never attack them, then why is Russia attacking Ukraine? Well, besides talking shit and being a little aggressive with demands,
I have instructed the Foreign Ministry to convene a summit of the Budapest Memorandum signatory countries. If it fails to take place or refuses to provide security guarantees to Ukraine, Kiev will regard it and the clauses signed in 1994 as null and void.
Just to be clear, tearing up the Budapest Memorandum means that Ukraine goes nuclear, quite literally. And the backdrop to this is that as the Soviet Union was collapsing, Kiev, pushed by the US and the UK, gave up all its nuclear arsenal. So everything from strategic bombers to warheads to intercontinental ballistic missiles were handed over to Russia, the successor, of course, to the USSR. It was, in fact, one of the conditions on which Washington recognized and supported Ukrainian independence. It said, you're good to go, just two things. One, lose the weapons, and two, please, just please, don't turn into a hateful nation.
Americans will not support those who seek independence in order to replace a far-off tyranny with a local despotism. They will not aid those who promote a suicidal nationalism based upon ethnic hatred.
While Bush Sr.'s words likely came back to haunt him because in 2014, after the Crimean referendum, Yulia Tymoshenko, former Ukrainian prime minister, had one of her phone calls leaked. And what did we hear from the country's political establishment? A pledge to continue the non-proliferation and tolerance? No, unfortunately, what we heard were talks of bombs and killing.
I hope I'll use all of my connections and the whole world will rise against the Russians and bomb them into oblivion. We need to kill them all with nuclear weapons.
And she wasn't one rogue voice. We heard this echoed by ambassadors and the people too. In fact, at that time, in 2014, almost 50% of Ukrainians supported nuclear rearmament. Fast forward 8 years to the Munich Security Conference. This isn't Zelensky chatting on the phone to his friend about his wild fantasy, to massacre ethnic Russians as it was with Tymoshenko. He is, in all seriousness, standing before the global elite and saying, I am considering reneging on one of the most significant documents of the 20th century. And it's really not far from being political blackmail, because essentially Zelensky is saying, unless you all in front of me do more, send me more weapons, more money, more troops, preemptively sanction Moscow for what we're not sure, then I will fire up those nuclear factories again.
Besides that, on March 12, 1999, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined NATO. And Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, and Slovakia joined in March 2004. Some of them were a part of the Warsaw Pact. And Albania joined April 2009. So as you can see, NATO's getting closer and closer to Russian borders. Putin ain't fucking with that. And who's left stuck right in the middle? The Ukraine. And NATO, primarily the U.S., has been trying to get the Ukraine to join its conglomerate of militaries. And Putin has constantly told the U.S., the Ukraine, and NATO to chill out with all this expansion, because if they keep pursuing this joining of forces, there's going to be some problems.
Я хочу еще раз все-таки подчеркнуть это. Я говорил, но мне очень бы хотелось, чтобы вы меня услышали все-таки в конце концов. И донесли это до своих читателей, зрителей и пользователей в интернете. Но вы понимаете или нет, что если Украина будет в НАТО и военным путем будет возвращать себе Крым, европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией. Конечно, потенциал объединенной организации НАТО и России несопоставим. Мы понимаем. Но мы также и понимаем, что Россия одна из ведущих ядерных держав. По некоторым компонентам, по современности даже многих опережает. Победителей не будет. И вы окажетесь втянутыми в этот конфликт помимо своей воли. И вы даже не успеете глазом моргнуть, когда будете исполнять пункт 5 Римского договора. Господин президент, конечно, не хочет этого развития. И я не хочу. И я не хочу. Поэтому он здесь и находится и мучает меня уже 6 часов подряд.
Now, what's really messed up is the fact that none of the NATO members are helping the Ukraine, because the Ukraine isn't a part of NATO. And the United States doesn't have any troops out there in the Ukraine right now. And they've been coercing the Ukraine to join NATO the most. They've provided the most of the military aid out of the NATO members. And shit hit the fan and nobody's helping.